I met him in 1983. He gave me my first internet password. It was May ** May. Anyway, Mark is the kind of person you would hope the world was populated with if you actually want to create a healthy infosphere. He's got a big heart and social skills, beaucoup social skills and beaucoup technical skills. He's just brilliant and a great networker. So I think that's all I need to say for now. Mark, welcome. I'll just say one last thing about Mark, which is that he knows everyone. So if you don't feel like he knows you, you're actually in the minority in this world. He actually knows everybody.
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate that. I do know a few people, but I don't know many of you. But I'm glad to be here today. And I'm going to press the button there and say present, and maybe this will actually work. I'm not really sure here. If it doesn't, well, we'll just plow through it. So, full disclosure, I was asked to do this last night. So I said yes, and here I am. And I'm really, really glad to be here. So basically, what I would like to share with you today is the work of the Internet Archive. Okay? So, and I also, second full disclosure, I'm also a stand-in, if you will, for my boss, Brewster Kahle. So some of you may know Brewster, some of you have may seen him speak or give TED Talks, etc. But Brewster's been a close friend for several decades, and I've had the last several years I've had the honor of working with him in San Francisco at the Internet Archive, where I manage the Wayback Machine and some of our other projects. A little bit of qualification for this particular audience relative to AI. Brewster worked with Marvin Minsky at MIT, worked with Danny Hillis on the creation of the thinking machine, at that time one of the world's fastest computers. Went on to create something called Waze, not the thing you use to get here today, Wide Area Information Service. It was one of the first publishing platforms and search engines for the evolving internet. We're talking pre-web days. Then he went on to create something called Alexa, not the thing that you talk to find out what the weather is like. It's basically was one of the very first systems to help figure out what people were doing with the internet. And he sold that to Jeff Bezos about 22 years ago. Really good timing vis-a-vis the dot-com crash. And it was because of that event that he was able to dedicate the rest of his life and his newfound fortune, winning the lottery, as he calls it, to the pursuit of universal access to all knowledge, which is the mission statement for the Internet Archive. And if this thing is working, there we go, it's starting to work. So universal access to all knowledge, that's the mission statement. We're a nonprofit organization. We have about 150 staff members located across the bay over there in San Francisco. I encourage any of you to come in and visit us. We have an open house every Friday, so tomorrow at noon we will serve lunch for maybe 50 to 75 people, and then we'll give a tour. And what we will tour is we'll basically go through the building and we'll share with you what we do. And I'm going to do a little bit of that now, but a little bit virtually. And so this is, we're basically an archive and we're a library. We're a library designated in California. And this is what the front page of our website looks like, archive.org. And you can use it to upload. That the red circle is telling you that you can upload anything you want, and thousands of things upload every day. We have billions of things in the archive. I'm going to run through some of them. We have a lot of software titles, hundreds of thousands of software titles. I don't just mean you can download the software, I mean you can run the software. We created emulation software for old computers, old operating systems. Moving images, books, more than 4 million books. More than 1 million of them are lendable right now. These are mostly modern books that are lendable. We've worked with library scholars and others to create an interpretation of US copyright called controlled digital lending, which represents the radical notion that libraries can actually lend out books. Digital books, if they choose. So if a library owns a paper book, it can lend out one version of a digital copy of that book with two controls. Control one, that there's a one-to-one ratio of digital to paper, and the second is that there's the control of digital rights management, the same way you would get a book from Amazon, for example. So we lend out books in this fashion. Many audio recordings, more than 2 million hours of television. We archive television news 24/7. We've been doing that for 9 years. So about 60 channels, including several international. And everything I'm talking about today is available for free, no advertising. We don't track you. And you can get it all right now on your laptop or your phone. I actually just saw a stat that more than half of our use now, of more than 1 million people a day, are accessing us via their phones. The bit that I'm most involved in is the web. My mission statement for the Wayback Machine is to help make the web more useful and reliable. So to that end, we archive about 3 billion URLs a week, and we've archived about 750 billion URLs so far. Altogether, we've got about 50 petabyte of unique storage, but we're paranoid, so we double that. And we have multiple physical locations where the information is stored. We also take a really long-term view of things. Even though we're converting things to a digital format, we understand that EMP happens, et cetera. So we have a physical archive in the East Bay, and we have 230 shipping containers in one of our buildings, and we have multiple buildings. So everything that we get, all the books, we bring in books by the shipping container, we ship them to the Philippines, we digitize them, we bring them back to the Bay Area, and we store them in our physical archive. Once again, I'm happy to follow up with any of you. If you want to come visit our facilities, you can do that. How do we do this? We do it with lots of hard drives. But we're really cheap. I noted we're a nonprofit. We try to take our money and use it wisely, and so we don't spend it on air conditioning. We use cool San Francisco air, and it mostly works, except for the hot days. The Wayback Machine looks something like this. You can also see we don't invest a lot in user design. But that's okay, because we make up for it in the content and what we have available. There are thousands of individual processes happening at any given time that define what comes into the Wayback Machine. We're not just taking pictures of web pages. We actually archive the elements on the pages, the CSS, the HTML, the JavaScript, the images, etc. Anyone can archive any URL at any time via the Save Page Now feature that you can see there on the bottom right. And that's done up to about 180 million times a week. We also have an iOS app and an Android app that anyone can download and then easily archive things or look up archives when they want to. We have browser extensions. We do interesting things with the information that we gather because we've been archiving much of the web, about 1.8 billion websites for 20 years. We can go back in time and we can generate structures of what websites looked for given time periods, even if the websites no longer exist. We can also take two different captures of a given URL and put them side by side and show what the differences are between them. One of the projects we're focused on right now is called the World News Project. So we're working with a number of different sources to catalog as much of the news from around the world as we can. It's more than 150 million URLs right now. So let me share with you, because a lot of what I'm talking about is very specific and practical, and a lot of you are very theoretical and working the idea of space of ideas. So one of the challenges around archiving born digital information, right? We're not just talking about the web, although much of what we're talking about is the web, is the evolution of how humans are publishing and sharing information in this digital medium. So one of the models that I'm looking at right now is moving from web pages to social media to messaging apps. And the messaging apps become robotic, and they're powered by AI. An example of this would be the Alexa and Google Home devices that you do talk with, right? And this idea that the UI of the near-term future may well be a conversational UI that's driven on the back end by AI and not necessarily clicking around in a web browser. And so that represents a lot of challenges in terms of archiving and trying to do sense-making across this large information space, not just looking at one conversation, but rather looking at as many conversations as possible to try to identify themes and trends and influences. We have many, many partnerships with organizations that use our information. The Sunlight Foundation on the top left there, they published a report yesterday about how the US government has been removing information, training information to help the Homeland Security folks process people applying for refugee status here in the United States. So effectively making it harder for people to come here legally. So why do we do this? With regard to the web, there are two main big problems with the architecture of the web. The first one is link rot. URLs just go away. The website goes away. The company goes out of business. The servers fail. The government says they no longer want to have that information available to people. The governments change, etc. So you go to you try to go to a URL and you get a 404. We've been identifying broken links referenced in Wikipedia, and we've fixed more than 10 million of them. So we do that through robotic software. Most everything that I talk about today is a kind of an interesting hat trick, but it's really cool when you're doing it at scale, and you can work in the space of millions or billions of things, and that's what we strive toward. This was an example of, an interview that Donald Trump gave, but it was no longer available on the public web, but you can get to it from the Wayback Machine. The other big challenge with the web architecturally is that the web is a bunch of addresses, right? But we don't really care about the addresses. In fact, it'd be nice if they went away. What we care about is the content, the stuff's at the other end of the address, the things you see in your web browser. The problem is there's no direct correlation between the address and the content. The content changes all the time in some cases. I mean, you'd expect it to, right? The front page of CNN, you'd expect that to change every hour. But you wouldn't expect a news article, per se, to change. Maybe they fix a spelling error, but you wouldn't expect the content of it, the meaning of it to fundamentally change. And yet that happens a great deal. And you wouldn't be able to detect that or to interrogate and explore that unless you had archives, captures of these objects over time, and were then able to compare them. So this is an example of where we're doing a side-by-side comparison about a page about George Bush. Here's an example also of use of web archiving. There was a CNN report. CNN did this report about Stephen Moore, who was nominated to the Fed, and they based this report on materials that they got from the Wayback Machine about how this guy had made misogynistic and racist proclamations in the past that had since been removed from his websites but were available via the Wayback Machine. And then after that came out, his nomination was withdrawn. So I want to speak a little bit. I don't have a lot of slides about this part I want to talk about, but it's frankly the thing that's like most animating me these days, and that is the evolution of our use of books as one component of the evolution of our interaction with information. So this is an article that's in the current issue of The Atlantic, written by Dan Cohen, who was the founding executive director of the Digital Public Library of America. He's now head librarian at Northeastern. And he basically made the observation, and I'd strongly recommend that any of you are interested to read this article, current issue of Atlantic, that the books of college libraries are turning into wallpaper. So he basically says that, the trend of books being taken out of libraries is a downward trend. In fact, there's a dramatic downward trend. But then he asked a few questions like, well, what does that really mean? Does that mean that people are accessing less information from books? And he suggests that no, in fact, just the opposite may be true. but the pattern by which we're getting information from books is changing. And indeed, he even suggests that the pattern in which we got information from books has always been one based upon a just-in-time, I'm looking for that reference because I'm trying to finish my paper and get all the citations in. I just got to dive in and find that and then get out, as opposed to this, idea that we have that we read books end to end and savor them and dig deeply, etc. So why this trend and why the idea of optimism here? Well, because what we are able through the web is to look for and then access quickly what we're looking for within a book because of services like Google Books, right? We can go through snippets, we can get right to the content of what we're looking for. And that's a great thing, except when it's not a great thing. Like when books aren't available. Like when the books are actually just paper and they're not digitized. Or they are digitized, but they're not accessible. Going back to the controlled digital lending model that I spoke of earlier, libraries may have the books, you may not be where the library is. Can you get access to a digital version of that book? Or maybe there's an idea in a book, but you wouldn't know it because how would you know it? It's not indexed in any fashion at the idea level, at the sentence level, at the paragraph level, at the page level. But we can work on that, and we are working on that. So we have a project that we call Turn All the References Blue. So I'm going to give you the small version of it and the big version of it. Okay, so here's the big version of it. The big version of it is that if you think of all the stuff that humans have been sharing so far, I'm going to group them into like three big buckets. The first one is books, like a little more than 100 million books, right? The other one is academic papers, and the third one is the web. Now, yes, there's lots of overlap between those three buckets. But from a technical perspective, they're actually fairly distinct. Books are mostly paper, academic papers are mostly PDF, and the web is mostly HTML, and once again, with lots of overlap. And in each of those three buckets, there is this content, there's the papers, and there's the books, and there's the web pages that reference other things, right? And even a modern book, I got a book that came out 2 days ago that has hundreds of references in it, and only 5 of the references were links, 5 of them. So I've got it on my iPad, I'm reading it, there's a reference to an academic paper or a news article or a book, and I can't even click on it. I can't even go to that thing right then and there. I consider that to be a design defect. I consider that to be a flaw. I consider that to be an opportunity. So that's what we're working on. So if you look at the degree to which these objects in these three buckets are linked today versus how they could be linked if all of the references were established, there's a huge delta. And I refer to this as latent links. These are just like links waiting to happen. So that's kind of the big picture. The small picture is the Martin Luther King Jr. Wikipedia article. So there are about 100 books referenced on that article right now, and 60 of them are a click away. 30 of them we already had at the Internet Archive. 30 of them I purchased on eBay over the last few months and donated to the Internet Archive, where we digitized them, and then we established links to them. So that's kind of cool. 60 books now are a click away from that one Wikipedia article, but there are 4 million Wikipedia articles in just the English version of Wikipedia, and there are 290 Wikipedia language editions overall. So we're working on this project, and if all goes according to plan, in the next 2 to 3 months, we'll have about 60,000 books linked from the English Wikipedia site that we have at the Internet Archive, more than 100,000 links. We're in the process of ramping up our software to do that right now. But that's just the beginning, because there are 1.7 million books that are referenced in the English Wikipedia site, and our goal is to acquire, digitize, and link all 1.7 million of those books and contribute to the creation and evolution of knowledge. Why? Yeah, it's pretty cool. Turn all the references blue. So why is this important? You know, I've been kind of obsessed for the last few days with Chernobyl. How many of you saw the HBO series Chernobyl? How many of you read the 2 very significant books that came out last year about Chernobyl? Okay, not many of you. I encourage you to do both of those things. Full disclosure, I got started as a young adult working in the Pentagon. I worked there for 3 years on nuclear war modeling and in the early 80s. And so I've been kind of, for a long time, my wife would say obsessed, but concerned with some of these larger issues. And so Chernobyl or other kind of disasters like it, to me, represent, once again, opportunities. So here's another one. The 737 MAX 8s, right? The two crashes that just happened. What do those two events have in common? Well, I suggest, this is a hypothesis at this time, and I'm doing the research on it right now, and even part of the problem with the problem is the fact that I have to do research on it, right? That some of these questions that I have, that it's hard to get good, solid answers for. So the two things that, to me, that these have in common are the defects that contributed to the events were known, right? In fact, in some cases, they were fairly well known, but they weren't necessarily known by the right people at the right time. And in this case, we're talking about the operators of the plant or the pilots of the plane. And in this space that we have, in which we have multi-$10 billion companies who do nothing but work to do surveillance technology to understand our personal motivations so they can target advertising at us to perpetuate the current economic scheme of the internet, it's a travesty that we haven't marshaled our technical, social, and moral resources together to try to help us understand how best to be adaptive and work well in our environment so that we can forestall both the disasters that happen quickly as well as the long-term slow-motion disasters like climate change that are happening much more slowly, where the information, I suggest, is available, it's just not evenly distributed. So that's a picture of the Martin Luther King page. Here's an interface we put together of tweets from the IRA, and this is the Internet Research Agency, not the Irish Republic Army, and about the 2016 elections. Here's another case in which Twitter made this information available to us. First of all, the information was available, right? But we didn't have access to it, because we're looking at individual tweets. Unless you have access to the totality of all the tweets, you really had no idea what was going on. We didn't know what was going on Facebook in this room. Probably this is not a good representation of people on Facebook, but if you were on Facebook, you wouldn't have necessarily even known what was happening on Facebook because you were seeing your view into Facebook. You'd have to have a Facebook view of the world to understand what was happening there. And right now, they're a private corporation. They're making their data sets available on a very limited basis to researchers under NDAs, so even they have a very challenging time understanding the trends that are happening there. So this is a little contribution that we made. Twitter made this data set available of tweets from Iran and Russia around the 2016 election, so we put an interface on to make it easier to search. Here's another one out of the headlines, the Mueller report. How many of you have read the Mueller report? So, all right, okay, please read the Mueller report. If I wasn't here today, I'd be over in San Francisco. There's actually a place called Manny's in the Mission, and they're reading the Mueller report at Manny's today, okay, end to end. 40 civic leaders in San Francisco are reading the Mueller report. So I started reading the Mueller. I have not finished the Mueller report. I'm reading the Mueller report, and it struck me that there were 2,390 links in the Mueller report. 2,390 footnotes in the Mueller report, not links. There were 15 links. 15. So I thought, I don't know, that's an opportunity. So anyway, I've been working with some researchers and others, and we've identified about 500 links so far, things we can reference, the underlying documentation, such that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, scholars, researchers, students, and others who are trying to understand what the heck happened during these times will have better opportunities to do so. There was a study done by Jonathan Zittrain at Harvard looking at Supreme Court opinions over time and the incidence of link rot, and he showed that over a few-year time period for this particular collection of Supreme Court opinions, we had about 500 external references. 49% of them were no longer available on the public web. So the web is a fairly ephemeral medium, and yet it's the medium that we tend to share the most on. I'll also note, just for any of you that are into like the geekiness of PDF files and everything, well, I could go on that one for a while. But I will say this. Anyone know the file name, what they called the Mueller report? You know, Mark. They called it report.pdf, all right? So talk about, long-term preservation of the integrity of understanding a piece of information. Google report.pdf in 10 years and see what you're going to find. Sorry, the coda on that one is the Internet Archive is currently working with the Digital Public Library of America to republish an EPUB version of the Mueller report with links. And I think we're days away from the next version of that. Thank you. Yes, that's great. I'm going to quickly run through a few more things here. We do have a subscription service called Archive It. If any of you are at an institution that wants to get involved in web archiving, we offer that service. We do charge money for that. We're a nonprofit. Our budget was $17 million last year. One of the ways we bring in revenue is by providing services to museums, governments, libraries, and others, but we also receive a fair amount of philanthropy. As I noted, we archive a lot of the news. Here's an example of how we can do a full-text index of news. We have a lot of partners that we work with around news archiving that then use these resources for fact-checking. You can make a graph like this, really. Anyone in this room can make a graph like this in a matter of minutes with some cool web interfaces. And what this is interrogating television news archives looking for keywords against time. And this is used by the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, New York Times, and others on a fairly regular basis. Here's an example of another version of the graph from the New York Times. We also have been stepping up our effort to archive radio as another important medium by which humans are communicating and shaping ideas. In Rwanda, the massacre there, the genocide was in many ways catalyzed by radio broadcasts promoting hatred. And then we're also working to reinvent the web. So here's a call to a special number, a few people here who want to go camping. We have hosted 2 decentralized web summits in San Francisco with about 800 people, brought in some of the gray hairs, people like Tim Berners-Lee and Vince Cerf, and well, my boss Brewster, he's got a lot of gray hair, and some others. And we're working to say, if we're going to do this again, what do we do? We're not just talking about a theory about how might we rebuild, re-architect the web, but actually doing it. So the third version of this series is a camp. We're going to have it in a couple of months at a mushroom factory in Pescadero, abandoned mushroom factory in Pescadero. So if you want to come camping with us, you can do that. And then kind of in closing here, that's what our office looks like. Jeremy noted that we work out of a church in San Francisco. We bought a church of Christian Scientists. They were kind of downscaling. And we were looking for a space, and that was an event that we had, and there's Edward Snowden had beamed in for that particular event. And come experiment with us, if you will. I wrote down a few things here that I wanted to make sure I talked about, and I got all of them except for the one thing, which is, two things. One, if anything that I spoke about today sparked something in you and you thought you could benefit from some of the services that we work on, that we have to offer, please talk with me. I'm mark@archive.org. mark@archive.org. And if there's something that you have a question and say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you guys did X? We might do X. I got a request 2 days ago from an investigative reporting organization in the Philippines about doing interrogation of web archives of misinformation that had been removed from the internet to help them in an investigation. We didn't have the code to do that, but I put the call out last night in the community, and I've got 2 people coding that project right now. So how can we help you? That's my one thing. And the second thing is, if you can help us, that'd be great. What are we looking for? We're looking for feedback. We're looking for questions. We're looking for talent. If any of you are professors or work with students or have time on your own and have some technical skills, I'm especially looking for engineers, for developers. And if any of you are rich or know people who are rich, send them my way too. I'll have a conversation with them. So So that's it. I'm really, really honored to be here today, and I don't know about time. So I guess that means that if any of you have any questions, I'll do my best.
So I'm advocating that we move into our coffee break time and ask some questions. And I want to add that Mark has been so gracious to come out here on almost a moment's notice. And indeed, the other side of it is that Jeremy has given up time so that Mark can come out and give us a presentation. So,
But just before the question, I gotta blame Jeremy for all of this, actually. So here I am. I'm 23 years old. I just got out of the Pentagon. Moved to Berkeley. I was planning on pursuing my education, getting a degree in peace studies at Berkeley. But instead, I got connected with a whole lot of interesting people, and Jeremy was one of them. And Jeremy actually was the first supporter of one of my first projects, which was PeaceNet. So I co-founded a computer network for peace activists in the early 80s, just a few blocks from here. So thank you, Jeremy. Yes.
So you said you could upload anything to the Internet Archive. I'm thinking about a possible, well, first there's a question and maybe a request depending on your answer, but Wikipedia requires sort of like secondhand sources. So if you're an eyewitness to something, you can't just go upload your testimony, but it sounds like you could to the Wayback Machine.
Well, through the Internet Archive, yes.
Through the Internet Archive.
Yeah.
So my question ultimately is, what's your ultimate end? Who do you serve? When there's a conflict, let's say, between an individual and maybe state actors, like the politician you brought up, or let's manufacture some incident where a politician has a Me Too moment with an individual who uploads their testimony, which is prevented from being on Wikipedia. The politician goes, please remove this data. It's embarrassing. I'm running for office. What do you do?
We probably would leave it up in that particular case. I mean, you asked who we ultimately work to serve. Universal access to all knowledge is the mission. It's our guiding principle. We do make choices. There is material that we don't make generally available to the public. Close-ups of violence, for example, would be an example of that. The numbers we're talking about are quite large overall, billions of things, and every single day there's a process by which we go through. We err on the side of making things. We're a library, right, first and foremost. So if you say who we're trying to serve the people who would benefit from the information in our library. In the particular case that you just mentioned, without more, nuance to it, et cetera, I'd probably say we'd probably make that information available, especially in the case in which the information is maybe, of potential importance to a society or a time, and yes, it's. I think there's a word that. I put it in the title of my slide, and I don't think I actually used it at all in my talk, and the word is context. So we think that one of our approaches, we have two kind of principles. One principle is that an archive that's used is a healthy archive. We're not just stuffing stuff away that 50 years from now people can kind of brush off the dust and try to see, does this thing still work? But like using it day in and day out. And we get the feedback from people of what's working and what's not working. But the other one is that the idea that an anecdote to bad speech is not necessarily more speech, although that can be useful, but context, more context. So I would say in that particular case, we would probably, and we're not going to go out of our way to necessarily put a lot of effort into curating alternative perspectives per se, but we're definitely going to make ourselves available to them and help people access them.
Unfortunately, I missed the first bit of your talk. Sorry if you've already answered this question, but an increasing amount of data being generated right now as DNA sequences, as sequencing has become cheaper. DNA sequences, I'm not sure if that is part of your in the purview of what you are archiving? Is that at all on the radar?
I didn't understand the question.
DNA sequences.
If people want to upload their DNA, that's fine. We're not actively going out of a way to mine like Ancestry.com or 23andMe or things like that. I'm not sure the motivation of your question. I'll also say that we do operate under the law. We're here in America. We respect the Digital Millennial Copyright Act, and there's European law like right to be forgotten and things like that. So we operate generally on an opt-out basis. And when things come to our attention, I mean, I'll give you a very specific example. There was 2 Fridays ago, I think it was, right before the holiday weekend, there was an announcement that a mortgage organization in America had accidentally released information on like 800 million people or something. And so we quickly went in and checked, and we had a lot of archives from that institution, and we actively worked I personally worked that night to try to make it not available. So it doesn't address your DNA question per se, but we try to do the right thing.
No, so I was just curious whether you also operate digitization pipelines. So do you digitize them, for instance, also make it searchable for your audio, your video, your image material, your text? It's all searchable?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. We don't support full text search on the entire web archive that we have. We provide an index into anchor text that points to things and file names, etc. But for our books, yeah, full text. For our television news, actually, that's pretty cool. We do a combination of closed caption as well as the lower third chyrons, where we do OCR, optical character recognition, on those, and then index those. The same with radio and other of the. So it's a whole. It's called a derivation process or a derived process, and it's this huge matrix. So if you upload a file of type X, it'll automatically be derived into file types A, B, C, D, E, etc. And there's literally tens, if not hundreds of, or sometimes millions of those processes that are going on every single day, and it's all kind of like technology magic. Yeah.
Okay, let's thank Mark Graham.